that video that we opened with, that was done by a 15-year-old girl. She found all those pictures on the internet. Her name was Lizzie Palmer, and she put that all together last year, I believe, when she was a sophomore in high school. And it became one of the most popular videos on the internet. They even played it on CNN. And Jill Ranabauer came across it in her surfing travels, and she gave it to Pastor Bob, and it kind of went around the staff, and they said, David, you got to get this video for Patriotic Sunday. And I said, oh, okay. And it was easy to find. It was all over the internet. You just can't, you don't have any access to it. It's kind of protected. You can't download it. And I thought, well, how am I going to do this? So I wrote to her. I just sent her a letter. I said, Lizzie, we really like your video, and we want to show it in our church. And she mailed it to me the next day. But those movies and videos like that, they stir in us a sense of patriotism and a sense of nationalism. And I just wanted to ask you real quick, and this is a real question, okay? What's a movie that does that for you? What's a movie that you've seen that kind of gets you all verklempt for the country? Real question. Saving Private Ryan. That is probably my favorite movie. Flags of Our Fathers. Men of Honor. The Patriot. Ooh, great movie. Any others? Which one? Oh, We Were Soldiers, yes. Patton? Yeah, that's a long time. Any John Wayne movie. The Grit movie, too? Yeah, and Midway, too, yes. If you ever get a chance, HBO also did a miniseries called Band of Brothers. That is just great. We love those movies because they stir up in us a sense of patriotism and nationalism. And for those of you who have served or who come from military families, they kind of mean just a little bit more. Movies like that end up meaning so much. And I don't know, in my family, I don't have any relatives on either side who have ever served. I come from a really long line of cowards. And I'm not used to this. All right, when I first met Joanna, I married into a military family. She can't turn around without seeing a grandfather or an uncle or a father and now a brother who hasn't served. And her family is not alone. There are many people, many who know what it means, and many people who know the cost of what it means to serve their country. And for each of us, the flag means something different. And for some, it means something more. And from the time that we're young and we're in grade school or less, we learn the Pledge of Allegiance in school. I think it's one of the only things that we still remember from that time, other than remembering our left hand and our right hand, and some of us have forgotten that. The Pledge of Allegiance, ironically, was written for a children's magazine called Youth's Companion by a Baptist minister named Francis Bellamy back in 1892. The magazine was trying to sell flags to schools, and they needed a gimmick. They needed an advertising campaign, and they contacted Francis, and he wrote the pledge to honor the 400th anniversary of Columbus coming to America. And I was thinking about the pledge this week when I was thinking about what I was going to say, and I was noticing that we call it the Pledge of Allegiance, or it's like saying the oath of loyalty, or the vow of faithfulness, or the promise of adherence. And we place our hands over our hearts, or we salute patriotically, and we declare our duty to the flag and for which it stands. And I was thinking, how many allegiances do we have? Because I would guess we probably have quite a few. We have family allegiances, right? And we have job allegiances. And we have friends, we have obligations, we have hobbies, we have TV shows, right? Got to get home Wednesday night to see Lost, right? We have brand loyalties too. Tide is the only soap you will ever use in your life. Well, the Marines have a saying, beat Army. No, I'm just kidding. The Marines, sorry. That's for you, Matt. All right, the Marines have a saying, it's Semper Fidelis. And it's a Latin term which means always faithful. And if you were ever to ask a Marine what it is that they are always faithful to, they would give you three answers. It's God, country, Corps, in that order. Even in the Pledge of Allegiance, I noticed, the actual pledge to the flag and the country and the republic, they all fall where? Under God. Second place. There's actually a Christian folk singer right now named Derek Webb who, for one of his choruses on his first album, he wrote these words. He says, "My first allegiance is not to a flag, a country, or a man. My first allegiance is not to democracy or blood. It's to a king and a kingdom." And so as patriotic as we want to get, and as much as we love our flag or our country or our president or our freedom, we can never lift any of those things higher. They can never be our first allegiance. And that doesn't make us bad patriots or any less patriotic. It doesn't make us less American. The reason why we can be here and celebrate and sing, the reason why we can wave our flag, the reason why we have a favorite movie is simply because all through our history, and even to this day, even to this very moment, there are men and women who are out there right now and who are laying down their lives so that we can be here. And whether we know their names or we are connected to them in some way, or even if we don't, our liberties and our freedoms come from people who are willing to fight and to die for us. You know what phrase I can't stand? It's a free country. You know, like, hey, is it all right if I park here? It's a free country. Is it all right if I just take a couple of these? It's a free country. Hey, I don't mean to tell you how to do your job. Hey, it's a free country. See, free implies that there's no cost. And while it's true that you and I enjoy certain freedoms and certain lenient graces in this world, those graces and those freedoms, they don't come cheap. And I would consider it a grave insult to have offered my son or my daughter to this country only to have them shout back that their allowances were given to them for free. My freedom was bought and paid for. It was free to me, but it was somebody else's gift. You and I right now, we are exercising our rights to religious freedom. And very similar to our own American history, we don't sit here as free men and women by anything that we have done. As Christians, we are also the recipients of a generous gift, a costly gift, a gift that still required someone to die. And I don't know what you've been told about Jesus of Nazareth, but he died a war criminal. He came to this earth as a revolutionary, and he stood against the status quo and called people everywhere to ideas of peace and love and forgiveness, and his enemies were not going to stand for that. Why is the cross so important to Christians? Why do we wear it on our necks? Why is it in our symbols? If Jesus was supposedly so great and so powerful, why did he die? Or more importantly, why did he allow himself to be killed? I mean, all that noise for 3 years only to have it end like that. Couldn't God have found a better way? A different way? Why did Jesus die? It wasn't because he talked about love and forgiveness. John Lennon had a message of love and peace. He was only 40 years old when he was killed. Martin Luther King spoke about reconciliation and peace, and he was 39. Maybe Jesus' life was like theirs. Keep in mind that he was executed on a cross. The Romans had been crucifying people for 300 years before Jesus showed up, and they continued to do so for another 300 after he was gone. Jesus was executed by the state for treason. His accusers had said, "We have found this man subverting our nation. He opposes payment of taxes to Caesar and claims to be Messiah, a king." And from then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jews kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar, no friend of the government, no friend of the president." And anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar. But they shouted, take him away, crucify him." "Shall I crucify your king?" Pilate asked. "We have no king but Caesar," the chief priests answered. See, emperor worship was the big thing of the day. And as much as Pilate tried to find a way to free Jesus, he still had to honor Rome and to have Jesus killed, even if it was only to dismay other rebels. But even before this event takes place, his own people have him arrested by church police for a whole second charge. Luke 22 says, "At daybreak, the councils of the elders of the people, both the chief priests and the teachers of the law, met together, and Jesus was led before them. 'If you are the Messiah,' they said, 'tell us.' Jesus answered, 'If I tell you, you will not believe me.' They all asked, 'Are you then the Son of God?' He replied, 'You say that I am.' And they said, 'Why do we need any more testimony? We have heard it from his own lips.'" So basically his crime was the temple police asked Jesus, "Who are you?" Jesus reached in his back pocket, pulled out his license, and showed them. I don't know if you've ever seen my license plate on my car, but it says 3 simple words: Jesus is God. And I was at the grocery store last month. I went to Albertsons because it's my store. And I was on my way in, and a guy kind of flagged me down and said, hey, is that your truck over there? I said, yeah. He said, yeah, your license plate frame says Jesus is God. I said, yeah. He said, when did that happen? You see, there are people who believe that Jesus is like Buddha, that Jesus was simply a man and that his followers try to live then as he did, or that Jesus was a literal son of God and who is a complete and separate being. And while both of those views are popular, neither one of them can be true. Early Jews were monotheistic, meaning they only worshipped one God. And there was the Egyptians and the Persians and the Romans. All these groups worshipped a pantheon of gods. The Jews only prayed to, they only worshipped one. So for a Jew to say that he or she worshipped Jesus or prayed to Jesus, it would have been idolatry. If Jesus were simply a man or a prophet or even a second God, Christianity would never have gotten off the ground if Jesus had been anything different than God himself. It's a hard concept, so let me try to approach it from a different angle. You and I might agree that God, the creator of time and space, exists somehow in a spiritual plane, in an unknown way that is foreign to you and me. God is. Then God creates. It's the first thing we ever see God do in history. God is a creator. He makes a tangible thing. He makes a three-dimensional thing. He makes a universe and a galaxy and planets, and then he makes life, new life, life apart from his own. And he makes microbes and plants and animals and people. And God desires to be in relationship with his creation. The Bible says that in the earliest of history, God walked and talked with his creation. In God's desired kingdom, there was room for laughter and discussion and brevity between creation and creator. But these creations he made were limited. They were finite because God gave them over to their own desires and will. These creations, they continually fell victim to their own devices, and the relationship between creator and creation was broken. There was separation. There was division. God existed where there was no sin, and humanity existed within sin, and neither one of them could make the connection. In effect, there was a war. There was a line, and there were sides, and all through history, humanity was more interested in exploring its own desires than it was in reclaiming the relationship that it once had with its creator. And this isn't how God wanted it to be. So as the creator, God could no more ignore humanity's condition than he could simply excuse it. But there needed to be restoration. There needed to be peace. But it wasn't going to come without a price. So God knew that humanity could not fight or win this division. His creation was not strong enough. His people were too fragile. They were young and they were flawed. And if restoration was to take place, it needed to happen by his doing. So God came to us. And to do that, he had to become like us. He could not come as himself. He would have been too big, too brilliant. He would have been too exhaustive and too bright. He would have been too perfect and too wonderful. He would have been too powerful, too magnificent. No, he had to come in a way that you and I could identify with. So God came as a person. He came as flesh, and he came as blood. He came with the name Jesus, and he called himself the Son of God, meaning that he was of the same house as God, or he was of the same make as God. The author Paul writes about Jesus. Jesus, being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And he wasn't then later crucified because things got out of control, or because the world just wasn't ready for a Savior. No, Jesus died as a ransom. He died as a martyr. Jesus took the cost. He took the punishment. He took the weight and the depravity of the creation, and he took it upon himself. And he went to war against sin and separation, and he died on a battlefield for the cause and freedom of a restored relationship between you and God. There was no other plan. There was no other way. Paul continues, and being found in appearance as a human being, Jesus humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Jesus is the God who became like us, a God who stood on the front line against sin and went to battle for us, and who died for us, a cause that you and I could not die for. Our freedom today is not free. It had a cost. His blood, and only his blood, was given to set me free. And we have flags and colors and symbols, and all of this stirs up patriotism in the hearts of you and I as Americans. We love our country. We pledge allegiance to it. And on days like today, we recognize that our freedom and our liberties are there because of people. People who stepped in and took our place on fields and plains. And we sing songs of glory. We stand in honor, and we are filled with loyalty and a sense of nationalism. But as a Christian, I recall that my first allegiance is not to a flag, it's to a king. Dr. Shadrach Lockridge was the pastor of Calvary Baptist Church out in San Diego up until the year 1993. His ministry touched the lives of more than 100,000 people. He preached at crusades, revivals, religious rallies, evangelistic conferences around the world. And Dr. Lockridge was active in the civil rights movement, and under his leadership, Calvary Baptist hosted several of its leaders, including Dr. Martin Luther King and the Reverend Jesse Jackson. But most importantly, Pastor Lockridge is best known for his stirring 6-minute description of Jesus Christ. So, our closing benediction stirs up patriotism and nationalism and unparalleled glory for my first allegiance. Let's listen.